1 gearbox and explain a little bit about how it works. Where the driver sits, we have the tub, which is made out of carbon fibre. Then behind that, on 4 studs, we have the engine bolted directly onto the tub. And behind the engine, we have the gearbox bolted directly to the engine. And all of these parts are stress members. They're part of the chassis, meaning that the rear suspension is in fact bolted directly on to the gearbox. So this is the front of the gearbox casing. It's made out of cast magnesium, and you can see this input shaft at the bottom just down here. This is connected directly to the engine. The driver makes the shift request with the paddles on the steering wheel, either up or down. It then goes through the GCU, and the change cylinder here, which in this case is pneumatic with air, either fires the gears down or up the gearbox. So before we can get into the gear cluster, I need to take off the rear diff housing. So in this section of the gearbox and the rear diff housing, the diff gear and diff would sit in here, and in the side here come the drive shafts. So we have the drive shafts that then go out to the uprights, which are then obviously attached to the wheels, and so the power can go through the gearbox, the diff, and into the track. So now you can see that I've opened up the diff casing away from the gearbox casing to my right. You can see here that this is the main shaft that comes out the top of the gearbox. This gear, this bevel gear, drives this gear, which is then obviously connected to this gear, which then would go behind here onto the diff gear and rotate here, which then goes onto the drive shafts, which then obviously goes to the uprights and through the wheels and into the racetrack. So this on the top, just on the top inside the gearbox casing here, is the gearbox oil tank. Then all the oil that collects then gets flicked into the gearbox oil tank for then distribution around the rest of the gearbox. So the final thing I need to remove are if you look closely, these nuts here, and take the oil tank off at the top, and the cassette should come out here. So the lay shaft is the one that's connected to the engine. The engine comes out here and powers this lay shaft. Now, none of the gears on here actually turn away from the shaft. They're directly splined onto the shaft itself. You can see that this is first gear, these pair of gears. This is second gear here. And then we jump across here, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh, with these gears just here. So I've just put this piece of wood in place so you can actually see the gears turn. We can see here, because all the gears are turning freely, you imagine the engine power coming here. We're spinning all the gears, but nothing on this left-hand side is going into the diff. So you can see here that the car, or the gearbox, is actually in neutral, because there's no power or no drive coming out the back of the gearbox here and going to the diff. So how do we actually change gear? Well, I showed you earlier on the change cylinder on the outside of the gearbox that moved forwards and backwards and then shifted the change mechanism. Well, through the internals of the gearbox, that's actually connected to this, and this is the barrel and the selector shaft along here. So as the change goes through the change cylinder, it actually comes here and moves this barrel around, which then moves this piece here, which is the selector fork, across. We've got the engine running, the power is coming through here onto the lay shaft, the gears are turning on the main shaft at the top, but the gear at the back here, the main shaft, isn't actually turning. It's just the gears that are spinning on top of the main shaft. So we're in neutral. Then the driver pulls a gear and it goes into first gear. So you can see the selector fork here move across, and we take first gear just here. So let me simulate the engine moving. Pick the shaft up again. And you can see that the gear, the main shaft, is actually rotating now all the way through. So we're in gear. Then the driver selects another gear. The selector fork moves across and we take second gear. Sorry, it just fell out. And now at the back, you can see that the main shaft is spinning again. So then we go up another gear, and if you watch this selector fork, we head into third gear. And again, it's all locked up on that main barrel, and we take third gear. And again, into fourth, you can see this selector fork move across fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. So we're in seventh gear, sixth gear, fifth gear, fourth gear, third gear, second gear, and first gear's just gone dog to dog. And you can see there that the timing is obviously absolutely perfect. And again, the process continues all the way along, and that's an absolutely beautiful piece of engineering that you can see there. So to better explain the gears on the main shaft, which is the more complex of the two shafts, I've gone and picked up a few spares off the shelf. So on the lay shaft, you can see here that this hub is splined. So the main shaft has splines like this, and this hub fits over the main shaft. Then you can see here that we're splined on the outside of the hub as well. So Those splines are so this dog ring can fit over the top and have movement side to side, lateral movement side to side, but stay connected and can drive the gear that's attached to this hub. Then on this section of the hub, we have a bearing, as you can see here, that spins, and we then have the gear that goes over the bearing. So as you could see before, the gear is actually not connected to the hub. It's not driven all the time by the shaft. Then when we put on the dog ring, and this is how we can change gear, the selector fork that I showed you earlier and actually goes over the dog ring like this, the selector fork moves across and then engages the gear, which means that the gear then drives the shaft, which then goes through to the diff and can drive the rear wheels. One important thing to note is the cut of the dog just here. You can see that it isn't at 90 degrees to the gear, it's actually cut like this. Now the reason for that is when the gear and the dog ring come together, when it's being driven, when it's loaded, they actually pull each other together. And when you're putting 700 or 800 brake horsepower through these gears, it's obviously very important that mechanically they drive each other together.